Good morning, friends. Today we are going to talk about deglutition. Deglutition is swallowing, and this topic we are going to talk in three parts. First, we'll talk about the esophagus, special features, esophageal sphincters, esophageal peristalsis, and lastly the applied aspects. Please take down these points so that you will know what are the things you have to cover in the topic deglutition. First we'll talk about the esophagus, that is the parts of esophagus, special features, esophageal sphincters, esophageal peristalsis, and applied aspects. And next, in deglutition we'll talk about the functions of deglutition, why deglutition is essential, and we'll talk about the muscles of mastication, stages of deglutition. This is important for you in exam point of view also, stages of deglutition, and disorders. Disorders of deglutition. Please take down this. In deglutition we'll talk about the functions of deglutition, muscles of mastication, stages of deglutition, and the disorders of deglutition. And next we'll talk a word about vomiting here. I know it's not a very pleasant sensation, vomiting, but as a student you have to read about vomiting. First, definition of vomiting. Associated features, stimuli and vomiting centers, and mechanism of vomiting, and lastly the emetics and antiemetics. So in the topic vomiting we'll talk about the definition of vomiting, the associated features, stimuli and vomiting centers, and mechanism of vomiting, and lastly emetics and antiemetics. Emetics are the drugs which induce vomiting, whereas antiemetics are used to prevent or to treat vomitings. Now coming to the esophagus. We'll talk about the parts of esophagus first. Basically, esophagus, it serves as a conduit to transfer food from the pharynx to the stomach. It transfers food from pharynx to stomach, and it is divided into three parts: upper esophageal sphincter, body of the esophagus, and lower esophageal sphincter. This is the pharynx, which continues as esophagus. Here is the upper esophageal sphincter. This is the body of the esophagus, which opens into the stomach. This is the lower esophageal sphincter, and this is body of esophagus. In the upper part of the esophagus, the muscles are striated, and lower part there are smooth muscle. Whereas in the middle, that is the body of the esophagus, it consists of both striated muscle and smooth muscle. And all the muscles of the esophagus are innervated by vagal fibers. So these are the parts of esophagus: upper esophageal sphincter, lower esophageal sphincter, and body of esophagus. Upper esophageal sphincter consists of striated muscle, whereas lower esophageal sphincter consists of smooth muscle, whereas the body of esophagus consists of both striated and smooth muscle. And there are some special features of esophagus. One is, the esophagus differs from the other parts of the gastrointestinal system for not having the electrical slow waves to trigger contraction. That means esophagus has no electrical slow waves, whereas all the other parts of the gastrointestinal tract will have these electrical slow waves to trigger the contraction. And hence the muscle excitability is low in esophagus, and muscles in the body of the esophagus are relaxed always except during deglutition, and all the muscle fibers including striated fibers are innervated by the vagus nerve. And activation of the deglutition reflex initiates peristaltic contraction by neural mechanism, and presence of food bolus locally stimulates the peristalsis. So peristalsis is by neural mechanism, that is primary peristalsis. Primary peristalsis. And when the food bolus is present, it causes local peristalsis or secondary peristalsis. So it has no electrical slow waves as compared to the other parts of the gastrointestinal system, and that is why the excitability of its muscle is low, and the muscles of the esophagus are always relaxed except during deglutition, and all the muscle fibers are striated and are innervated by vagus nerve. And the activation of the deglutition reflex initiates the peristaltic contractions, that is by neural mechanism. Primary peristalsis is by neural mechanism, secondary is by local peristalsis, that is the presence of food bolus will cause the peristalsis. Next is the esophageal sphincters. The upper esophageal sphincter is mainly a physiological sphincter. It reflexly relaxes to allow the food from the pharynx to enter into the esophagus. The upper esophageal sphincter, which is almost continuation of the pharynx, it will relax so that the bolus of food will enter into the esophagus. Once the food entered, it constricts to prevent regurgitation of food back into the pharynx. See, once the food enter into the pharynx, the upper esophageal sphincter will relax so that the bolus of food will enter into the esophagus. And as soon as the bolus of food enters into the esophagus, this upper esophageal sphincter is closed so that the food bolus is not regurgitated back into the pharynx. That is the main function of the upper esophageal sphincter. Whereas lower esophageal sphincter remains tonically contracted. It relaxes only when the food from the esophagus enters the stomach. Therefore, it prevents the reflux of food back into the esophagus. Here is the lower esophageal sphincter, which opens into the stomach. This is the lower esophageal sphincter. Once the food enters into the lower esophageal sphincter, it relaxes so that the food will enter into the stomach. Once the food enters into the stomach, again this closes so that the food is not regurgitated back into the esophagus. So these are the main functions of the two esophageal sphincters, upper and lower. Upper will prevent the back flow of or regurgitation of food back into the pharynx by closure of the upper esophageal sphincter, and closure of the lower esophageal sphincter will prevent the regurgitation of food from the stomach back into the esophagus. Now, esophageal peristalsis. Two types of peristalsis occur in esophagus. One is primary and secondary. Primary peristalsis is initiated by deglutition reflex. In the third phase of the deglutition, when the food bolus enters the esophagus, a ring of contraction appears just cephalad to the bolus, which pushes the bolus towards the stomach. This is primary peristalsis, and it appears due to act of swallowing, whether or not food is present in the mouth. See, primary peristalsis is initiated by deglutition reflex. This is the esophagus. As soon as the food enters, this esophagus, upper part of the esophagus contracts so that the food is pushed further. And this primary peristalsis, since it is a neural mechanism, it will occur even if there is no food present in the esophagus. Just if we swallow without anything in the mouth, then also this primary peristalsis will occur, since it is a neural mechanism. In response to the swallowing, this primary peristalsis will occur if bolus of food is present or not. Then secondary peristalsis. When the primary peristalsis fails to push the bolus from the body of esophagus, secondary peristalsis starts. And secondary peristalsis is initiated by activation of mechanoreceptors due to presence of bolus of food. So, secondary peristalsis will occur only when the bolus of food is present. This is a local mechanism, whereas primary is a neural mechanism. So this is about the esophageal peristalsis, primary and secondary. Primary is a neural mechanism. So when, even if irrespective of the presence of bolus of food in the esophagus, these primary peristalsis will occur. If we just swallow without any food in our mouth, or without any eatable or without any solid liquid anything in our mouth, if we just swallow, this primary peristalsis will occur, since it is a neural mechanism, whereas secondary peristalsis will occur only when the bolus of food is present in the esophagus. Now coming to the applied physiology of esophagus. Applied aspects. One is reflux esophagitis. Lower esophageal sphincter remains always tonically contracted except during swallowing, when the food in the esophagus stimulates the esophageal peristalsis. When the lower esophageal sphincters become incompetent, then reflux of acid gastric content into the esophagus produces esophagitis, known as reflux esophagitis. See, lower esophageal sphincter is, as soon as the food enters into the stomach from the body of esophagus, the lower esophageal sphincter is getting closed. If at all there is any abnormality of this lower esophageal sphincter, and if it does not close as soon as the food enters from the esophagus into the stomach, there is a chance that regurgitation of acid content from the stomach will occur into the esophagus. Popularly it is known as heartburn, as the patient describes the pain in the retrosternal area. Commonly it is termed as heartburn. That means burning sensation behind the sternum. And if this continues for a long period, this regurgitation of the acid contents from the stomach, if at all it continues for a longer period, that may result in ulceration of the esophagus, and it is treated by proton pump blockers. This is the medical treatment, whereas surgical treatment is fundoplication. It is a procedure in which a portion of the fundus of the stomach is wrapped around the lower esophageal sphincter, so that that sphincter remains inside a narrow tunnel of the stomach. Surgical treatment is fundoplication. That means the lower esophageal sphincter, which is present at the junction of the esophagus and the stomach, it is wrapped inside the layer of the stomach and sutured, so that the lower esophageal sphincter is inside the stomach. So if it is inside the stomach, even if it is open also, there is no chance of the contents of the stomach getting into the esophagus. And another condition is Barrett's esophagus. In chronic reflux esophagitis, the normal squamous epithelium of the esophagus is replaced by columnar epithelium. This is called columnar metaplasia, and this is a premalignant condition. Actually, Barrett's esophagus, it is a chronic condition of the reflux esophagitis, in which the squamous epithelium is replaced by columnar epithelium, and it is a premalignant condition. And another condition of esophagus is achalasia cardia. Achalasia means failure to relax. Normally when food enters the esophagus, esophageal peristalsis pushes the food into the stomach. During this process, the lower esophageal sphincter relaxes so that the food easily passes into the stomach. During this process, the lower esophageal sphincter relaxes so that the food easily passes into the stomach. However, in some individuals, resting tone of the lower esophageal sphincter is high. Since the tone is high, the lower esophageal sphincter will not relax or fails to relax completely during deglutition, and this causes inadequate emptying of the esophagus, and the food collects in the esophagus and the organ is massively dilated. This condition is called achalasia cardia. See, normally what is happening? This is the lower esophageal sphincter, body of esophagus, lower esophageal sphincter, which is opening into the stomach. So when the lower esophageal sphincter, when the food is entering from the esophagus into the stomach, the lower esophageal sphincter normally relaxes so that the food will enter into the stomach. But here in achalasia cardia, the lower esophageal sphincter fails to relax. So the amount of food will remain in the esophagus. Some amount of food will remain in the esophagus since there is inadequate emptying of the esophagus into the stomach. So there will be some food present in the esophagus. Due to the presence of food in the esophagus, it will get dilated. This condition is called achalasia cardia, and it is due to deficiency of myenteric plexus or at the lower esophageal sphincter. Because of deficiency of this myenteric plexus, the lower esophageal sphincter fails to relax. And this achalasia cardia is diagnosed by rat tail appearance in X-ray. In barium meal X-ray, it is diagnosed by rat tail appearance, and the treatment for this is mechanical pneumatic dilatation. Mechanical pneumatic dilatation, that means air is filled here at the lower esophageal sphincter and the esophagus is dilated mechanically. Or surgical weakening of the sphincter and administration of drugs that decrease the tone of the sphincter. If the tone of the sphincter is decreased, naturally it will dilate. So these are the applied aspects regarding esophagus. Reflux esophagitis, Barrett's esophagus, which is actually a continuation or chronic reflux esophagitis, and achalasia cardia. And coming to the deglutition part, deglutition is chewing and it is an voluntary activity. And functions of deglutition: it cuts and grinds the large food particles. Cuts and grinds large food particles, and it also increases salivation, and it causes lubrication, and also it improves dental strength and hygiene. So these are the functions of deglutition. One is it cuts and grinds the large food particles, it increases salivation, it also causes lubrication of the oral cavity, and it improves the dental strength and also hygiene. And muscles of mastication. Masseter, temporalis, pterygoids, and also buccinator. Masseter, it elevates the mandible and helps in clenching of the teeth, because deglutition needs the clenching of the teeth to, when we have to chew the food, there should be clenching of the teeth, and that is done by the masseter muscle. It elevates the mandible and helps in clenching of the teeth. And temporalis helps in retracting the mandible, and pterygoids protrude the mandible and depress the chin, whereas buccinator prevents the accumulation of food between the cheek and the mouth. Buccinator, which is the muscle of the cheek, it helps in prevention of accumulation of food between the cheek and the oral cavity. And we have to chew the food for proper digestion and proper dental hygiene. We have to chew the food at least 10 times when you are eating something. Actually it is 32 times, but minimum is 10 times. Swallowing, it is a process by which the food material from the oral cavity is transported into the esophagus. Though it is initiated voluntarily, most part of it is involuntary or reflexive. Therefore, this is also called deglutition reflex. Deglutition or swallowing, it is actually, it begins as a voluntary activity, but it also occurs involuntarily. That is why it is also known as deglutition reflex. During the reflex act of deglutition, respiration is inhibited, which prevents entry of food into the trachea. When we are swallowing food, the respiration is inhibited so that the food will not enter into the trachea, because when the respiration is occurring, the vocal cords are abducted and the air passage will be open. But during swallowing, if at all this air respiration is not inhibited and the vocal cords are abducted and the airway is open, then there is a chance that food may enter into the trachea. And the receptors for deglutition reflex are present near the opening of the pharynx. Once these receptors are stimulated, the deglutition reflex is initiated. and the afferent impulses are transmitted to deglutition centers which are present in the medulla and the pons, and the efferent impulses are directed to the muscles of pharynx and upper esophagus via the cranial nerves. And coming to the stages of deglutition, there are 3 stages of deglutition. One is oral phase, pharyngeal phase and esophageal phase. First is the oral phase, which is voluntary. Oral phase is the voluntary phase. This is also called buccal phase. This is the voluntary phase of the swallowing. It is initiated when the tongue separates a bolus of food from the mass of the foodstuff present in the mouth. At the beginning, the tip of the tongue presses against the hard palate and then the body of the tongue presses on it. This action of the tongue moves the food backwards into the oral cavity. Thus, the food bolus is forced into the pharynx. So, as soon as we put the food in the mouth, the tongue separates this bolus of food from the mass of the foodstuff present in the mouth. At the beginning, the tip of the tongue presses against the hard palate and then the body of the tongue presses on it. This action of the tongue moves the food backward in the oral cavity. Thus, the food bolus is forced into the esophagus. Once the food touches the receptors of the pharyngeal opening, swallowing reflex is initiated. See, once the food, as long as the food is in the mouth, that is in the oral phase, it is a voluntary action. Once it enters the pharynx, the receptors at the pharynx are stimulated and now it becomes involuntary. So, the major objective of the pharyngeal phase is to push food bolus into the esophagus without letting it enter into the airway. So, any reflex pathway should have a receptor, afferent, center and efferent, isn't it? So, receptor for the pharyngeal phase is the receptors present at the opening of the pharynx. Receptors which are present at the opening of pharynx. As soon as the food enters the pharynx, these receptors are stimulated. And these pharyngeal receptors are transmitted to the centers through the trigeminal, glossopharyngeal and the vagus nerve. As soon as these receptors are stimulated, the impulses are sent through the glossopharyngeal nerve, trigeminal and the vagus nerve. That is the 5th, 8th and 10th cranial nerves. And the center for the deglutition is present in the medulla at the nucleus solitarius and nucleus ambiguous. Center for the deglutition or pharyngeal phase is present at the medulla at the nucleus solitarius and nucleus ambiguous. Nucleus solitarius and nucleus ambiguous. And the efferents are the muscles of the pharynx that are innervated by the trigeminal nerve, glossopharyngeal nerve, vagus and the hypoglossal nerves. So, the efferents are the muscles of the pharynx. So now, as long as the food is in the oral cavity, it is a voluntary action or voluntary phase, where as soon as it enters the pharynx, it is an involuntary action, and it is deglutition reflux, which has the receptor, afferent, center and efferents. And what happens in the pharyngeal phase? The soft palate is pulled in the upward direction, and the palatopharyngeal folds more in the inward direction. These movements prevent the entry of food into the nasopharynx. And this also provides a small passage for food to enter the pharynx. And the laryngeal opening is closed by the vocal cords pulled together. The larynx moves forward and upward against the epiglottis. These events prevents the entry of food into the trachea. So the laryngeal opening is guarded by the vocal cords. So these vocal cords are closed because the respiration is inhibited at that moment, and the larynx is pulled upwards and forwards against the epiglottis, and these events prevent the entry of food into the trachea. And the superior constrictor muscle of the pharynx constricts, which forces the food to enter deep into the pharynx and then from there into the esophagus. And simultaneously relaxation of the upper esophageal sphincter occurs that allows the food to easily enter into the esophagus. During this phase, the respiration is refluxly inhibited due to inhibition of the respiratory centers. This is called deglutition apnea. That means during this moment or during this period, there is no respiration because of inhibition of the respiratory centers. That is why it is known as deglutition apnea. So this is what happens during the pharyngeal phase. Now coming to the esophageal phase. Once the food enters into the esophagus, which is facilitated by relaxation of the upper esophageal sphincter, the peristaltic wave or the primary peristalsis is initiated just below the upper esophageal sphincter. And reflexly, the upper esophageal sphincter contracts that prevents the regurgitation of food back into the pharynx. And the peristaltic wave travels to about 3 to 5 cm per second, and it takes about 10 seconds for the food bolus to pass through the entire esophagus. So the upper esophageal sphincter first relaxes so that the food enters into the esophagus. Once the food enters, it closes so that the food is not regurgitated back into the pharynx, and a peristaltic wave occurs at the esophagus so that the food is passed from the esophagus into the stomach, and this wave travels 3 to 5 cm per second, and it takes about 10 seconds for the food to travel throughout the esophagus. If the primary peristalsis is ineffective, a secondary peristaltic wave is initiated to push the food bolus. With the primary peristalsis, if the food is not being pushed properly, then the second peristaltic wave will occur that will push the food into the stomach. And during deglutition, respiration is temporarily arrested, and the food does not enter into the respiratory passage. For this, the larynx will move forward and upward against the epiglottis. Speaking or coughing during swallowing keeps the laryngeal outlet opened, and therefore there is a risk of food entering into the respiratory passage. That is why you should not talk when you are eating, because talking or coughing will keep the laryngeal outlet open, and this will cause the food to enter into the airway. So these are the three phases of deglutition: oral phase, pharyngeal phase and esophageal phase. Oral phase is a voluntary phase, whereas pharyngeal and esophageal phases are involuntary. Now coming to the disorders of deglutition. So if deglutition reflex is impaired or abolished, then the regurgitation of food into the nose or aspiration into the larynx and trachea occurs. It is seen in the 9th or 10th nerve paralysis, in lesions of medulla. See this 9th and 10th nerve these are the afferents which carry the impulses from the receptors of the pharynx. If there is paralysis of these nerves, then it cannot carry the impulses, and that will result in decreased deglutition, or it may cause regurgitation of food into nose or trachea. See, as soon as there is bolus of food present in the pharynx, it is sensed by the receptors, and that sensations are carried through the 9th and the 10th nerves to the center, to the deglutition center, which is present in the medulla. If at all these nerves are paralyzed, then they cannot carry the impulse and the swallowing cannot occur. If the swallowing cannot occur, then naturally the food will be regurgitated back into the nose or the trachea instead of going into the esophagus, because of impairment of the 9th and the 10th nerves. And another condition is dysphagia. It is difficulty in swallowing. It can be due to acute or severe pharyngitis, or any inflammation, acute inflammations in the oral cavity. These conditions will cause difficulty in swallowing. Dysphagia is difficulty in swallowing. So this is about swallowing or deglutition. Now coming to the vomiting. It is the expulsion of the gastroduodenal content from the gastrointestinal tract to the external environment via the mouth. Expulsion of gastroduodenal contents from the gastrointestinal tract to the external environment via mouth. There are some associated features which occurs along with vomiting. Vomiting is usually preceded by the feeling of nausea, tachycardia, sweating, pallor, dizziness, and dilatation of pupils. It is associated with retching that forces the contents of the stomach into the esophagus. So it is associated with nausea, tachycardia, and increased salivation in the mouth. All these will occur along with vomiting or just prior to the vomiting. These are the associated features. And stimuli and the vomiting centers. Stimuli and vomiting centers. Vomiting is a reflex phenomenon, the center for which is located in the medulla, and the receptors present in many parts of the body provide input to the vomiting center in the brainstem. Vomiting center present in the reticular formation of the medulla consists of various scattered group of neurons that control the different aspects of vomiting. So vomiting center vomiting center, it has inputs from many areas of the body. There can be input from the stomach, there can be visual inputs. If we see something very awkward, we get that vomiting sensation, isn't it? And it also has limbic inputs. Cortical inputs and vestibular inputs. This is example of motion sickness. When we travel, sometimes we get that vomiting sensation, that is because of the vestibular input. And it receives inputs from all these parts and it sends the efferents to the gastrointestinal tract via the 7th, 9th, 10th and 12th nerves. 12th cranial nerves. And thus vomiting occurs. And coming to the mechanism of vomiting. So after receiving inputs from all the different parts of the body, it sends efferents to the 7th, 9th, 10th and 12th cranial nerves of the through these nerves to the gastrointestinal tract, and thus vomiting occurs. Now coming to the mechanism of vomiting. The genesis of reverse peristalsis that starts from the middle of the jejunum. This sweeps the contents of the intestine and the duodenum into the stomach. And the relaxation of the pyloric sphincter that allows the intestinal contents to enter into the stomach. And the forced inspiration occurs against the closed glottis. Lowering of the diaphragm increases the intra-abdominal pressure. This is followed by vigorous contractions of the abdominal muscles. Thus, the intra-abdominal pressure sharply increases, which forces the gastric contents to enter into the esophagus. And relaxation of the lower esophageal sphincter allows the gastric contents to enter the esophagus. Normally, the upper esophageal sphincter remains closed and prevents regurgitation of food into the pharynx. With stronger retching and sharp rise in the intra-abdominal pressure, the upper esophageal sphincter relaxes, which allows the chyme to enter into the pharynx and from there into the mouth. An entry of this vomitus into the trachea is prevented by central movement of the vocal cords, that is closure of the glottis and inhibition of respiration. During deglutition also the entry of food is prevented into the air passage is prevented by the closure of the larynx, that is by abduction of the vocal cords. And the same process occurs during vomiting also, so that the vomitus will not enter into the trachea. And emetics and antiemetics. Emetics are the drugs that induce vomiting. These chemicals stimulate the receptors that are present in the chemoreceptor trigger zone located in the area postrema, a V-shaped band of tissue on the lateral wall of the fourth ventricle. And many antiemetics prevent vomiting by inhibiting this chemoreceptor trigger zone. So antiemetics act by inhibiting this chemoreceptor trigger zone. So this is in brief about deglutition, which includes the esophagus, deglutition proper and vomiting. Deglutition, in functions of deglutition, it is the main function of deglutition is to grind the food particles to maintain the dental hygiene, to increase the salivation and to cause lubrication of the oral cavity. And stages. In stages you should remember the oral phase, pharyngeal phase and the esophageal phase. And you should remember the events that occur in the each phase of deglutition. And the assignment for today's class is write about the stages of deglutition. You write the names of the stages and also you describe the events that occur in each stage of deglutition. So please remember the assignment. You should write the names of the stages of deglutition and also the events that occur in each stage of deglutition. This is the assignment for today's class. Thank you.